The rain fell steady that night, cold, silver, and endless, turning the prairie into a wash of mud and shadow. The wind moaned through the bare branches of the lone elm by the wagon trail, and the horses, tired and slick with rain, shifted restlessly under the weight of the covered wagon. Inside it sat a man whose eyes carried more storms than the sky above. He was a widower, a single father, making his way west with nothing but 2 worn horses, a half-loaded wagon, and a little girl who had just fallen asleep wrapped in an old quilt. The road behind him had taken everything except his faith, and even that felt thin these days, thin as the worn leather reins he held between his fingers. He had left the last settlement before sunset, hoping to reach the next before night closed in. But the trail was longer than the map promised, and now he was stuck between nowhere and nothing, with only the rain for company.
Ow.
Every sound out there, the wind, the branches, the distant thunder, minded him how small man really was against the wild. He glanced toward the back of the wagon where his daughter slept, her small breaths soft and even. For her, he kept moving. For her, he pushed through each night, no matter how tired his bones felt. The lantern hanging by the driver's bench flickered in the wet air. That's when he saw it just ahead, near the bend in the road. A figure. At first he thought it was the shape of a tree or a trick of the rain, but as he drew closer, the outline became clear. A woman, holding something close to her chest, standing in the downpour as though she'd been waiting for someone or had nowhere else to go. He slowed the wagon, heart thudding. Strangers on the open trail often meant trouble, yet there was something in the way she stood, trembling, but still, that made him pull the horses to a halt. "Ma'am," his voice came rough and cautious through the rain. "You lost." The woman didn't move for a moment. Then she lifted her head, and lightning cracked across the sky, showing her face for a fleeting second pale, frightened, and drenched, with eyes full of desperation. "Please," she said, barely loud enough to be heard. "My baby." He stepped down, boots sinking into the mud, and as he neared her, he saw what she held, a bundle wrapped in a wet blanket. The baby didn't cry, only stirred faintly against her chest. He felt the weight of the moment press down on him, the same way the world had pressed down when his wife took her last breath years ago. That same helplessness, that same storm in the heart. "Where's your wagon?" he asked. "Gone," she whispered. "They left me when the river rose. I tried to follow the trail, but—" Her voice broke, and she held the baby tighter. "I couldn't go any farther." He didn't ask who they were. The look in her eyes told enough. Folks heading west often lost more than they bargained for: wagons, supplies, even family. Still, something about this felt different. Abandonment in the middle of nowhere was cruel, but her calm in the face of it felt strange. Almost as if she wasn't entirely surprised to be standing there alone. "Get in the wagon," he said finally. "You and the child. There's room enough." She hesitated, glancing at his wagon, then back at him. "Why are you helping me?" He shrugged, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "Someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it. Now it's my turn." He took her hand cold as River Stone and helped her climb up. The baby whimpered softly as the woman settled near the back, wrapping the blanket tighter. He climbed onto the bench and gave the reins a gentle snap. The horses started forward, their hooves squelching through the mud as thunder rolled behind them. Inside the wagon, the woman whispered to calm the baby, her voice soft like a hymn. The sound of it filled the silence between the man and the storm. He found himself listening, though he didn't want to admit it. That gentle tune reminded him of nights when his wife sang by the fire to their daughter before sickness took her. He blinked hard and focused on the road ahead. After some miles, he spoke again. "What's your name?" She hesitated before answering, as if names still carried danger. "Call me whatever you like," she said. "Names don't matter much anymore." He frowned, but didn't push. "You'll freeze if you don't dry off soon," he said, tossing her his old coat. "We'll stop by that tree up ahead. There's a bit of shelter under it." When he stopped the wagon and stepped down again, the rain had softened into a mist. He tied the horses and went to gather some brush for a small fire. The woman stayed quiet, rocking her baby under the wagon's cover. When he returned with the spark of warmth between his hands, she was watching him closely as though studying his every move. "You travel alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Just me and my girl." "You must trust no one," she murmured. "Trust's a luxury these days," he said. "But I trust in the Lord and my horses." So far, both have carried me this far." She smiled faintly at that, a weary kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Faith," she whispered, "that's all any of us have left." The fire crackled low, and for a while neither of them spoke. The baby stirred again, this time letting out a weak cry. He turned toward the sound, feeling an ache in his chest he couldn't explain. Something about that cry reached down into an old wound that hadn't healed. "Is the child ill?" he asked quietly. The woman looked down, rocking the baby slowly. "She's tired," she said, "just tired." He wanted to believe that, but he'd seen enough on the trail to know when a child was fading. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the hum of rain and the sound of distant thunder crawling away into the night. He stared into the fire, trying not to ask questions he didn't need answers to. Still, the thought gnawed at him. Who leaves a woman and her baby out in the wild in a storm like this? And why was she out there alone, so far from any camp or settlement? When he finally looked up again, she was staring into the fire too, her eyes reflecting the flames. "You ever lose something you couldn't bury?" she asked softly. He took a deep breath. "Yes," he said. "My wife. The fever took her. Buried her near the Platte River." She nodded slowly, almost as if she already knew. "Then you know what it's like to walk on when everything in you wants to stop?" "I know," he said, "when you'll find a way to." But she only looked at the fire and whispered, "I already lost what I was walking toward." He didn't understand what she meant, not then. Maybe he didn't want to. The trail had its share of broken hearts and untold stories, and sometimes it was better not to open them. He banked the fire, laid out a blanket for his daughter, and sat near the wagon's wheel, keeping watch. The storm moved east, leaving only the steady drip of rain from the wagon cover. For a brief moment, peace settled in. Then, in the middle of the night, he heard it a sound faint but sharp. The baby's cry had stopped, too suddenly. He sat up fast, heart racing. "Everything all right?" he called softly. No answer, just the wind. He moved closer to the wagon, the firelight barely touching the woman's face. She sat perfectly still, staring down at the bundle in her arms. The baby was quiet, too quiet, and that was when he saw something in her eyes that made the breath freeze in his chest. It wasn't grief. It wasn't fear. It was something else entirely, something that didn't belong in a night like this. He stepped back slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle near the wagon wheel, though he didn't know why. The horses shifted uneasily, snorting in the dark. The woman looked up at him then, her face pale in the dying firelight, her voice calm as the rain. "You said faith keeps you alive," she whispered. "Then hold on to it now, because you're going to need it." The wind picked up again, sweeping through the trees, and the flame flickered low. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled once more long, low, and hollow as if the night itself was warning him that something far heavier than rain was coming. The man stood frozen in the rain, his heart beating fast, his mind trying to understand what he had just heard. The woman's words echoed in the night like a warning carved out of stone. He could feel something cold crawl up his spine, something that had nothing to do with the weather. The wind howled through the prairie, carrying the smell of wet earth and the low groan of the wagon wood shifting in the damp. For a long moment, he didn't move. He watched her, that strange calm in her face, the baby held too still against her chest. He wanted to speak, to ask what she meant, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he did what men like him always did when fear crept close. He turned back to the horses, ran a hand down their necks, and pretended he wasn't shaken. The old trick of keeping his hands busy so his mind wouldn't wander too far. The night dragged on slow. The rain stopped before dawn, leaving behind a heavy fog that wrapped the world in silence. When the first thin light of morning broke, he finally saw her clearly. She sat just where she'd been, beneath the wagon cover, with the baby wrapped tight in her arms. Her dress was still damp, her hair clinging to her face, but she didn't look tired, just hollow, like someone who'd been emptied out by life and left behind to walk the rest of the road with no map. He brewed some coffee from the tin pot he kept in the wagon. The smell rose warm and bitter into the cold air. He offered her a cup, but she didn't move to take it. Only when his little girl stirred awake in the back did the woman look up again. Her eyes softened slightly as she watched the child sit up, rubbing sleep from her face. "You travel far?" the woman asked finally. He nodded. Been on the road near 2 months now, heading west. Hoping to find a bit of land, something we can build on, just you and her." He nodded again, glancing at his daughter. "Her mother's gone. Fever took her last winter. After that, there wasn't much left for us where we were." The woman looked down at her baby and whispered, "The fever takes what it wants. It took us too." He studied her carefully. There was something in her voice that made him believe she'd seen more than sickness, something deeper, heavier. He wanted to ask where she came from, who she'd lost, but she turned away, ending the conversation before it began. By mid-morning, they hitched the horses and started down the muddy trail again. The wheels groaned as they rolled over soaked ground. The fog hung low, curling around the wagon like smoke. His daughter sat beside him on the bench, while the woman and her baby stayed under the cover. Every now and then, he'd catch her reflection in the lantern glass still, silent, watching the world pass as if she were waiting for something unseen. When they reached a shallow river crossing, the horses balked. The water wasn't high, but the current ran fast from the night's rain. He climbed down to guide them across, feeling the cold bite through his boots. The woman stayed behind, holding the baby close. His daughter peeked out through the wagon flap, calling softly, "Papa, is it safe?" "Safe enough," he said, forcing a smile. But even as he said it, he felt the uneasy weight of eyes on him, not just the woman's, but something beyond her, something watching from the fog. Halfway across, one of the horses stumbled, grabbed the bridle and steadied the animal, but the jolt splashed water up his legs. By the time they reached the other side, his coat was soaked again. He climbed back up, coughing from the cold air, and looked toward the woman. She hadn't moved. Only when the wagon began to roll forward again did she whisper something under her breath, too soft to catch, but it sounded like a prayer. By noon, they stopped near a patch of dry ground where the road forked. He decided to rest the horses and cook something warm. As he built the small fire, his daughter ran to pick up fallen twigs, her laughter light and clear. The woman watched her for a long time, her eyes distant but gentle. "She reminds me of someone," she said quietly. He glanced at her. "Your own child, I'd guess." "No," she said. "Someone before her. Someone I lost before I even knew her name." He didn't know how to answer that. The fire popped, filling the silence between them. The smell of smoke and boiled beans mixed with the damp air. She finally spoke again, her voice low. "You ever feel like the road's pulling you somewhere you don't want to go, but you keep walking anyway?" He nodded slowly, all the time. "But stopping's worse." She looked at him then, and for the first time, he saw something alive behind her calm. "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes stopping is all that's left." He wanted to ask what she meant, but his daughter came running back just then, laughing as she held a small bird's feather in her hand. The tension broke for a moment, replaced by the soft hum of a normal afternoon. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that this woman carried something heavy, something she wasn't ready to share. They rode again through the afternoon, the land stretching wide and empty around them, told his daughter stories to pass the time, old tales his wife used to tell about angels that watched over travelers, about prayers that sometimes got lost on the wind, but still found their way home. The woman listened quietly, her head bowed. When the girl asked her to tell one, she shook her head. "I've forgotten all my stories," she said softly. "Then make a new one," the girl said. "That's what Papa says when I forget things." For a moment, the woman smiled a small, almost broken smile, but she didn't answer. By sundown, the sky turned the color of iron, and another storm rolled in from the east. They stopped near a grove of cottonwoods, hoping for cover. He set up camp again, though he could feel the unease still hanging between them. When the fire was lit, the woman finally spoke, her eyes on the flames. "I wasn't left behind," she said suddenly. "Not like you think." He turned toward her. "Then what happened?" "They ran," she said, "when they found out what I carried." She looked down at the baby in her arms. "They said it wasn't right, that no good thing could come from what happened back at the river camp." He didn't speak. He just waited. She kept her eyes on the fire. We were part of a wagon train. There was sickness spreading through the group. Some said it came from bad water. Others said it was something worse. I don't know. People started dying fast, and when I got sick, they wanted to leave me behind. Only I didn't die. Not then. When I woke, they were gone. And the baby?" he asked quietly. She looked up at him then, her face pale in the firelight. "The baby wasn't born yet. She came after, alone in the dark. I thought she wouldn't live, but she did, so I kept walking. The man swallowed hard. There was truth in her tone, but also something that didn't fit. He'd heard plenty of hard stories on the trail, but never one told so calm, so sure. He studied her face for any sign of deceit, but there was none. Just a strange peace, the kind that comes from someone who's already faced the worst thing imaginable. His daughter had fallen asleep near the fire, curled in a blanket. The woman rocked the baby slowly, her eyes never leaving the flames. "You're a good man," she said after a while. "Most wouldn't stop for strangers." "Maybe I'm just stubborn," he said, half smiling. "Or maybe you're still trying to make up for something," she said softly. He froze. "What makes you say that?" She looked at him steadily. "Because you carried the same look I once did. It's the kind that comes when you've prayed too long for something that never came." He turned away, stoking the fire. "I've prayed enough to know not every answer's meant to be heard." "Then maybe this one is," she whispered. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain again. The horses stirred restlessly. The baby began to fuss, and she hushed it gently, rocking it close. He tried to convince himself it was just a story, just another broken traveler trying to find her way. But deep down, something about her didn't feel of this world. Not evil, not dangerous, but other, like she was carrying a piece of some old sorrow that didn't belong on any map. When he finally lay down near the fire, sleep came slow. He drifted in and out, hearing the rhythm of the rain against the wagon, the soft hum of the woman's voice singing again. It was the same tune as before, but this time it felt different, lower, almost mournful, like a prayer for souls already gone. Then sometime before dawn, he woke to silence. The fire had burned 2 embers. The rain had stopped. He sat up quickly and looked toward the wagon. The place where the woman had been sitting was empty. Only the baby remained, lying in the same wet blanket, alone. The trail stretched before him, dark and endless. And for the first time in years, the man felt his faith tremble. The man's breath caught in his chest as he stared into the empty wagon. The air felt heavy, too still for dawn, and his pulse thudded in his ears. The woman was gone, vanished, as if the night had swallowed her whole. Only the baby lay there, wrapped tight in that same wet blanket, eyes closed, chest rising slow and shallow. He reached for the edge of the bundle and froze. The cloth was dry. Dry, though it had been soaked through the night before. He looked around the camp, the fire pit cold, the horses restless, the mist curling low across the ground. No footprints, no sound, just the faint cry of a crow somewhere in the distance. He whispered her name, though she'd never given him one. Nothing answered back. He lifted the baby gently, cradling it close. The little one stirred, then went quiet again, warm against his chest. Something in that moment made his throat tighten. He didn't understand what had happened, but he knew one thing. He couldn't leave this child behind. Whatever the truth was about that woman, she had placed the baby in his care, whether he was ready or not. When his daughter awoke, he told her the woman had gone to find something and might be back later. She looked up at him with sleepy confusion, clutching her blanket. "But what about the baby, Papa?" He hesitated, then said, "We'll take care of her, just for a while." They packed the wagon and set off again. Though every few minutes he found himself glancing back down the trail, expecting to see her appear through the fog, but no one came. The silence that followed was thicker than before, stretching across the plains like a weight that couldn't be shaken. As the miles passed, he began to wonder if she had ever been real at all. The more he thought about it, the stranger things felt. The dry blanket, her quiet words about the fever, her talk of prayers and lost roads. He told himself he was imagining things that she must have left in the night, afraid or ashamed. But deep down, something about the way she'd said "you're going to need your faith" wouldn't leave his mind. By late afternoon, the sun broke through for the first time in days, spreading pale light over the trail. The warmth felt wrong, almost out of place after such a cold night. His daughter sat beside him holding the baby, humming softly like she used to when her mother was alive. Every now and then, the baby made a small sound, a sigh more than a cry, and she'd smile as if they were already friends. "She likes me," the girl said. "Seems that way," he said with a faint smile. "You've got your mother's touch." The girl looked up at him, curious. "Papa, do you think her mama will come back?" He kept his eyes on the road, "I don't know, sweetheart, maybe." But in his heart, he didn't believe it. That night, they stopped near the foothills of the Rockies. The land was changing, higher, rougher, lonelier. He made camp beneath a cluster of pine trees, set the horses to graze, and built a fire that crackled low. As the sky darkened, he watched his daughter rock the baby near the flames, whispering small lullabies. The sight filled him with both warmth and unease. The baby had a calm about her to calm. She rarely cried, rarely stirred, as if she was listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear. Sometimes her eyes would open, wide and dark, looking not at faces but at the air itself, following shapes that weren't there. He tried to brush it off as tricks of light or his own tired imagination, but the feeling gnawed at him. That night, he dreamt of the woman again. She stood at the edge of a river, her dress blowing in a wind he couldn't feel, her arms empty. When she turned to him, her eyes were filled with both sorrow and warning. "Don't go west," she whispered. "Not with the child. Not where the mountains touched the sky." He woke before dawn, sweating despite the cold. The fire was still glowing faintly, his daughter asleep with the baby beside her. Everything seemed normal, but his chest felt tight. He stepped away from camp and stared out across the horizon. The trail westward looked endless. Somewhere beyond those peaks was the land he'd promised himself he'd reach a fresh start, a place to build again. But now the road felt cursed, shadowed by something unseen. By midday, they reached a small trading post nestled near a river crossing. The place was half abandoned, just a few shacks and a general store run by an old man with a gray beard and watchful eyes. The trader eyed the baby when they came in. "Yours?" I asked. The man shook his head. "Found her on the trail." Mother disappeared. The old trader frowned. "You'd best be careful, stranger. Folks around here have been talking about a sickness moving along the wagon routes. Started south, near the Platte. Some say it wasn't a sickness at all. Said there was a woman traveling alone with a child that brought death wherever she stopped. They say no one who took her in made it far. The man's blood ran cold. You think I believe campfire tales?" The trader shrugged. "Believe what you want, just keep moving. The mountains have their own ghosts." He left with supplies and a heaviness he couldn't shake. "Ah!" On the road again, the words followed him like a whisper he couldn't silence. He told himself it was coincidence, just old men spinning stories. But as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long, he caught his daughter looking at the baby in a way that made his heart ache. "Papa," she said quietly. She doesn't blink much. Sometimes it's like she's listening to Mama's voice. He stopped the wagon. "What do you mean?" "She talks to someone when I'm not watching," she said, frowning. "Not with words. Just—" She moves her hands and looks at the fire. He knelt beside her. "It's just a baby, sweetheart." "Babies do strange things, I know," she said, her voice trembling a little. "But I think she knows things." He didn't know how to answer that. He only reached over and pulled his daughter close. "She's just tired," he said softly, "same as we are." The wind rose again that night, bending the grass flat against the earth. As he lay awake, he thought about turning back. But there was nowhere to return to, no home, no farm, no family waiting. West was the only way left, even if it meant carrying this mystery with him. 2 days later, they came across an overturned wagon by the side of the trail. The canvas was torn, the wheels broken, and the earth around it was blackened, as if fire had scorched the ground. He climbed down to look, his boots crunching through ash. Among the wreckage, he found a child's Toya, small wooden horse, half burned. His daughter stayed close behind, holding the baby tight. "Stay by the wagon," he said sharply. She hesitated. "Papa, what happened here?" "Accident," he lied. "Nothing we can fix." But when he turned to leave, he saw something carved into one of the fallen boards. It was a small cross, roughly etched, and beneath it, the word faith. He didn't know what it meant, but the sight made his stomach twist. He hurried back to the horses, glancing once more toward the smoldered wreck before climbing up. As they rolled away, the wind carried a faint smell, like old smoke, and something else, something metallic. That night, he prayed for the first time in months, not for himself, but for his daughter, for the baby, and even for the woman who had vanished. He asked for strength to keep going, for courage to face whatever waited ahead. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the baby staring at him through the flickering firelight, her small hand reaching toward the flames. and for just a moment the fire burned brighter, higher, as though answering something only she could ask. His daughter stirred in her sleep, whispering softly. "Mama says don't be afraid," she murmured. He froze. "What did you say?" "She said don't be afraid," the girl repeated, eyes still closed. He stared into the dark woods beyond the camp, every sound amplified, the whisper of branches, the crack of distant thunder, the faint cry of an owl. I felt the presence of something near, something that had been following them since that night in the rain. He didn't sleep at all after that. By morning, the air had turned cold again. The mountains loomed ahead, sharp against the gray sky. He looked down at his daughter and the baby, both asleep under the wagon cover, and wondered how much farther his faith could carry them. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the road west wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about redemption for whatever he had done, for whoever that woman had been, and for the mystery he now carried in his arms. But as the wheels turned and the sun rose over the peaks, he couldn't shake the feeling that the truth waiting beyond those mountains might cost him more than he was willing to lose. The wind grew sharper as the wagon climbed the mountain road. The sky was a pale silver, cold and watchful, and the air carried that heavy stillness that came before a storm. The man pulled his coat tighter, his eyes fixed on the narrow trail ahead. Every turn looked the same: trees, heavy with mist, rocks jutting out like the bones of the earth. He hadn't seen another traveler in 2 days, not since the wrecked wagon. It felt as though the world had emptied, leaving only him, his daughter, and the baby that no longer seemed like a stranger's child, but something far more mysterious. His daughter sat wrapped in a blanket beside the baby, whispering softly, her voice blending with the creak of the wagon wheels. He couldn't make out the words, but she spoke like she was answering someone. He turned slightly uneasy. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" She looked up at him, innocent and calm. "To her mama," she said. He froze. "What do you mean?" "She talks to me sometimes," the girl said, "when it's quiet. She says we're getting close to where we're supposed to go." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're just dreaming, honey. The road's long. Makes people imagine things." But she shook her head. She said not to be afraid of the dark tonight. He didn't answer. He only looked ahead, feeling that old weight return to his chest. The road curved again, and for the first time he noticed something strange in the distance. Figure standing by a large boulder, still as stone. The horses sensed it too, snorting nervously. As they drew closer, he realized it was an old wooden cross, weathered and cracked, leaning slightly against the rock. At its base were scraps of faded cloth and small carved toys. Graves. He slowed the wagon, the air thick with unease. "Stay here," he said quietly, stepping down. He approached the cross slowly. The earth around it was disturbed, as if recently touched by hands. Kneeling, he brushed aside the wet leaves. A small wooden plaque lay half buried in the dirt. The writing nearly gone, but still legible enough to read a single word: faith. The same word that had been carved into the wrecked wagon days ago. He stood up fast, scanning the trees. There was no sound but the wind pushing through the pines. He felt eyes on him, though no one was there. His hands shook slightly as he climbed back into the wagon. "What's wrong, Papa?" his daughter asked. "Nothing," he said quickly. "We just keep moving." The trail narrowed as they climbed higher, and the fog thickened until he could barely see past the horses' heads. Every sound, the rattle of the wheels, the squeak of the harness, the low sigh of the wind felt louder, sharper. The baby began to stir, then let out a small cry that cut through the silence like a blade. He tried to calm her, humming softly, but the noise didn't stop. It grew, echoing strangely, as if something else were crying back from the woods. He snapped the reins, urging the horses forward, his heart racing. He didn't dare look to the sides, afraid of what he might see. The fog seemed to move like a living thing, curling around the wagon, swallowing the trail behind them. Then suddenly the horses stopped. No amount of pulling or shouting moved them. They stood rigid, ears pricked, staring straight ahead. He followed their gaze and saw it. A figure stood in the middle of the road, barely visible through the mist. It wasn't moving, just standing there, waiting. His first thought was that it was another traveler, but as the fog shifted, he saw the outline clearer. It was a woman, her dress torn and dark from the rain, her hair hanging loose around her face. He felt his throat tighten. He knew that shape. He climbed down slowly, every step heavy. "Stay in the wagon," he told his daughter. The woman didn't move as he approached. When he was close enough, he spoke, his voice low and trembling. "You left, where did you go?" She looked up, and the sight stopped him cold. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow and distant. "I never left," she said softly. "You just stopped seeing me." He took a step back, confusion flooding his mind. "What are you saying?" She glanced toward the wagon, her expression unreadable. "The road tests every man who thinks he can outrun his past. But you can't. You can only walk through it." "I don't understand," he said, his voice rough. "You will," she whispered, "when you reach the pass." Before he could say another word, the fog thickened again, rolling between them like smoke. When it cleared, she was gone. He ran forward, calling out, searching the trees, but there was nothing, only the trail stretching on, silent and gray. When he turned back, his daughter was standing beside the wagon, clutching the baby close. "Papa," she said quietly. "The baby said she's cold." He stared at her, breath catching. "What do you mean?" the baby said. His daughter frowned. "I heard her, not with my ears. It's in my head." He grabbed her shoulders gently. "Listen to me. Don't talk like that. It's just a dream, you hear? Just the road making you tired." She nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe him. They rode in silence for the rest of the day. The mountains rose higher around them, dark and jagged. When night fell, they stopped near a frozen stream. The stars were hidden behind thick clouds, and the cold bit deep. He built a fire, small but bright, its light flickering across their faces. His daughter slept with the baby in her arms, their breathing soft and even, sat awake, his rifle across his knees, listening to the faint whisper of the wind through the trees. Then he heard a soft sound, like footsteps in the snow, slow, careful, coming closer. He stood, heart pounding. "Who's there?" he called. No answer, only the crunch of snow, then silence. He turned in a full circle, every muscle tight. The firelight caught something between the trees, a faint shimmer, like light reflecting off water. Then a voice, faint, carried on the wind. "Faith," it whispered. He felt his chest tighten. That word again, echoing from the night like a prayer or a curse. He took a step forward, rifle raised, but the sound vanished.
Ow.
Only the stillness of the mountains remained. He returned to the fire and sat beside the wagon. The baby was awake now, staring up at him with eyes that seemed knowing for her age. When he reached out, she didn't flinch. Instead, she gripped his finger tightly, her small hand warm against his skin. "You're not just a lost child, are you?" we whispered. The fire flickered, casting long shadows. Somewhere behind him, the wind shifted, and he swore he heard the woman's voice again, faint and near. "She's the answer you asked for." He turned fast, but no one was there. Only his own breath in the cold night air. Sleep never came, sat awake until dawn, the words circling in his head. When the first light broke, he saw something on the baby's blanket, a small wooden cross, carved rough and simple, the word faith etched into it. He held it in his hands, trembling. It was the same carving he'd seen on the grave, the same he'd found by the burned wagon. That day, as they climbed the last stretch of the pass, a storm began to gather. The wind howled, snow swirling around them. The horses struggled against the slope, their hooves slipping. He pushed forward, shouting encouragement, his daughter clutching the baby close under the wagon's cover. "Hold on," he shouted. "We're almost through." But then one of the wheels caught on a rock and splintered with a crack that echoed through the mountains. The wagon lurched, tilting dangerously. He grabbed the reins, pulling with all his strength, but the slope gave way beneath the back wheels. The wagon slid sideways, throwing up snow and earth. "Papa," his daughter screamed. He jumped onto the side rail, trying to steady it, but the ground was too soft. The horses panicked, rearing and pulling against their harnesses. In the chaos, the firewood tumbled out, scattering across the snow. He reached for his daughter, shouting her name over the roar of the wind. She clung to the baby, crying, "Papa, she's not crying! She's not crying!" He pulled them both close, the wagon creaking under the strain. The mountain around them seemed to groan, the storm swallowing every sound. He looked down at the child, her face calm, eyes open. The woman's voice came again, clear this time in his ear. Your faith brought you here. Now see what it was meant for. The wagon shifted once more, hanging at the edge of the drop. Snow whipped across his face, blinding him. He couldn't see the road anymore, only the white void beyond. He held his daughter tight, praying under his breath, not knowing if he was praying for safety or forgiveness. The storm howled louder, the earth trembled beneath the wheels, and for one terrifying second, he thought everything was about to give way. He looked down at the baby one last time, and saw her eyes open wide, glowing faintly in the storm's gray light. And then, all at once, the world seemed to stop moving. The storm's roar faded into a soft hum. For a long moment the world hung between silence and motion. Snow fell slow and heavy, coating everything in white. The man opened his eyes and realized he was lying beside the wagon, his body half buried in snow. The horses were gone. The air was cold enough to burn his lungs, but he was alive. He pushed himself up with shaking hands and looked around, calling out for his daughter. "Sweetheart," his voice cracked in the wind. There was no answer at first. Then, faintly, he heard a small cry, the kind that carried both fear and hope. He turned and saw her, just a few feet away, clutching the baby tight against her chest. She was shivering but alive. He stumbled toward her, falling to his knees and pulling both of them into his arms. "It's all right," he whispered, though his own voice trembled. "I've got you." The storm had passed, leaving the mountain eerily quiet. The wagon lay tilted against a snowbank, half broken but still upright. Somehow, they had survived the fall. Somehow, everything that should have been shattered was still whole. He helped his daughter back under the wagon cover, wrapping them all in the last dry blanket. The baby was calm, her tiny face peaceful, despite the cold. The man stared at her, still hearing the woman's words in his mind. "Your faith brought you here. I'll see what it was meant for." The morning sun crept over the ridge, turning the snow into fields of silver. The man felt warmth return to his fingers, though he didn't understand how. His coat was torn, his hands bleeding, yet his heart beat strong. He looked at the baby again and felt something stir deep inside, a quiet understanding he couldn't name. His daughter broke the silence. "Papa," she said softly, "I saw her again." The lady. He turned to her, afraid but calm. "Where?" "She was standing by the horses before the storm stopped. She told me not to be scared. She said the baby isn't lost. She said she's found." The man didn't answer. He only looked toward the pass above where the sunlight glowed brighter through the trees. They stayed there through the day, resting and warming themselves. He melted snow in a tin cup for water, and his daughter fed the baby small drops. Every time he looked at the child, the same feeling returned, a mix of sorrow, awe, and peace. There was something in her presence that quieted the noise inside him, the same noise that had followed him since his wife's death. By the second day he managed to repair one wheel and lead the horses back. They had wandered down the slope, but returned on their own. When he saw them, standing patiently in the white light, it felt like grace. He hitched them to the wagon again and packed what little they had left. Before they moved on, he stood by the broken edge of the slope and looked down at the path they'd taken. The wind carried whispers through the pine trees, soft but familiar. He almost thought he heard her voice again, steady, gentle, forgiving. "Keep walking." He nodded once, quietly. Then he climbed onto the wagon and urged the horses forward. The trail led them westward again, winding through the last stretch of mountain pass before opening to a wide plain below. The air grew warmer with every mile. The snow melted into thin streams that sparkled in the sunlight. His daughter laughed for the first time in days when she saw wildflowers pushing through the frost. The baby reached toward the light, her small fingers curling as if trying to catch the sun. That night they camped near a valley where the grass was dry and golden. He built a fire that burned steady, its smoke rising straight into the sky. His daughter sat beside him, the baby asleep in her lap. "Papa," she said quietly, "do you think the lady's in heaven?" He looked into the fire for a long time before answering. "I think she's somewhere kind, somewhere that doesn't hurt anymore." "She said you helped her," the girl whispered. "She said you did what no one else would." He looked at her startled. "When did she say that?" "In my dream," the girl said. She was standing by the river, smiling. She said, "Thank you." He reached over and brushed his daughter's hair from her face. Then maybe we helped each other. The fire crackled, and the stars came out one by one. The mountain behind them glowed faintly under the moonlight, quiet and distant. For the first time in years, the man felt a stillness inside him that wasn't emptiness, it was peace. When morning came, he noticed something strange near the wagon. In the snow beside their camp lay the wooden cross again, the one carved with the word faith. It hadn't been there when they arrived. He picked it up carefully, his fingers tracing the letters. The wood was smooth and warm, as though it had been resting in sunlight. He placed it near the fire and sat for a while, thinking of everything that had led him here at the storm, the road, the woman, the child. All the fear and loss that had carried him through the years now seemed to make sense in a quiet, unseen way. By midday, they reached the open plains. The land stretched wide and endless, the horizon shimmering under the sun. He spotted a small settlement in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys, the faint sound of dogs barking, a new beginning, waiting. As they rolled into town, people came out to see them. Travelers were rare in those parts after the storm. An older woman approached, kind-eyed and curious. "You come far?" she asked. "Far enough," he said. She looked at the baby and smiled. "That little one's a blessing. Looks strong." He nodded, glancing at his daughter, who beamed proudly. "She's a gift," he said. "One we didn't expect." They found shelter in a small cabin near the river. The locals helped them repair the wagon and bring food. In the weeks that followed, the man worked the nearby fields, his daughter played by the water, and the baby grew stronger each day. The sound of laughter returned to their lives, filling the cabin with warmth that had been missing for too long. Sometimes at night, when the wind blew softly across the plains, you would hear that same distant humming the tune the woman used to sing. It came faintly, as if carried by the stars, and every time he heard it, he'd smile. His daughter would ask, "Do you hear it too, Papa?" And he'd answer, "Yes." It's the sound of peace. As the seasons changed, the memory of that night on the mountain faded like a dream, but the lessons it left behind never did. He understood now that faith wasn't about waiting for miracles, it was about holding on when everything else was gone. It was about trusting that even in the coldest nights, something greater was still watching, still guiding. Years later, when the valley grew green and the river ran wide, he built a small wooden chapel on the hill above their home. At its door, he placed the cross he'd carried all that way, the one carved with the word that had followed him through storm, loss, and grace. He never carved another word beside it. And on quiet mornings, when sunlight poured through the chapel windows, he would kneel beside his daughter and the child they had found in the rain, and whisper the same prayer that had carried him across the wilderness. "Thank you for what was lost. Thank you for what was found." The wind outside would always answer softly, rustling the grass, carrying with it the faintest echo of a woman's voice, a reminder that sometimes faith doesn't move mountains, it simply helps a man survive them. And on that land, under the wide western sky, the story of a single father, a child, and the stranger who changed them became a quiet legend, one carried by travelers and whispered by firesides. About the night a man found more than a mother and her baby in the rain. He found the piece of himself he thought the world had taken away,